Assalamu alaikum lovelies, inshallah you've had a wonderful week. Now, do you remember where we stopped off with our story last week about Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, and when he had a really difficult time at home in his city with other people that he grew up with, and they weren't happy and they didn't like the fact that he didn't want to worship the statues. Do you remember? Now, we're at the point where he had to leave his city, and he was very sad to do that, but he wanted to find somewhere in the world where he could worship Allah and nobody could bother him for it. So he left his city and he travelled around the world searching for a place where he could call home, a place where he could worship Allah and no one could bother him. And there were lots of different adventures that happened along the way. We're going to fast forward to the point where he had his wife called Hajar and a baby boy called Ismail alayhi salam. Now, because Ibrahim alayhi salam was a prophet of Allah, Allah would give his prophets messages and signs to do things in their dreams. So one day he woke up after having a dream that he needed to take his wife Hajar and his baby Ismail all the way somewhere far, far away. And that's what he did. He walked far, far away with his family. So they walked and walked and walked and walked, and they reached a place in the middle of the desert. Now, there was nobody who lived there. There were only a couple of little mountains, and that's it. No trees, no food, no water, nothing. And that's where Ibrahim alayhi salam said, I need to leave you here. And he turned around and went, leaving his wife Hajar and his baby Ismail alone in the desert. His wife Hajar said, what are you doing? And suddenly thought, did Allah tell you to do this? And then she accepted that that's what Allah wanted, and Ibrahim alayhi salam left. Now, this is a very odd thing to do. Your dad would never just leave you and your mum somewhere in the middle of nowhere with no food and drink, but because he was a prophet, he knew that Allah was going to look after them and that something special was going to happen. Now, as the day went on, they were getting hungry and they were getting tired and there was nothing to eat or drink, and the baby was getting really, really hungry and starting to cry, and Hajar, the mum, was also getting really hungry and she didn't know what to do. So she would run to the top of a little hill called a Safa, and she'd look out and there was no one there to help her, and she'd run down the hill and back up another hill called Al-Marwa, and she'd have a look around and there's nobody to help her, and she'd run back to the first hill just in case and there's no one around, and she'd run back to Al-Marwa and there's no one around, and she'd run back and forth 7 times and there was nobody who could help her, and now she was getting worried. What happened was the baby was on the floor and he was crying and kicking his feet. A trickle of water came out of the ground underneath Ismail's feet, and as time went on, that trickle started flowing more and gushing until there was a lot of water. Hajar was so excited because they were finally saved with this water, and her and Ismail could drink and feel a lot better. This water was called Zamzam water, and it's special water that Allah sent to this special place. Now, they were stuck in a place in the middle of the desert and they didn't know where, and this was a very holy place that Allah chose specifically for them, and it's called Mecca. Now, as there was nobody there, it was very difficult for them to do much, but with time and water, then life started growing there, so they could grow things, grow plants. With time, as people passed in the desert as they were travelling, they would see that there were a few trees in this area, so they thought they'd go and have a rest there. Time passed, and people started living there. There were a few families, then more families, then more families, and this became a little place where there was and this became a lovely little community where people lived happily together in Mecca. Now, as the years went on and as Ismail started growing and growing, Ibrahim alayhi salam would come, he'd visit his son and his wife, he'd check and see that everything's okay, and then he would leave because he has other things to do elsewhere. And the place was flourishing and the place was growing and everything was lovely. When Ismail alayhi salam got a little bit older, Ibrahim once came and he said, I need to build a special place in this spot, and it's going to be the first mosque in the whole world. So Ibrahim alayhi salam started making bricks with Ismail, and they would then pile the bricks on top of each other and build a little structure, a little cube called the Kaaba. Ismail alayhi salam would help his father, and they would both check that the Kaaba was built nice and level and nice and straight. So they both built the Kaaba together, and this was the very first place in the whole world where people could go and worship Allah, and people would pray there and they would do pilgrimage there, just as they did now. As the years went on, Ibrahim and Ismail were very, very close. Now, Ibrahim alayhi salam was a prophet, and what happened was when Ismail alayhi salam became a little bit older, he was a prophet too. One day, do you remember we said that prophets get ideas from Allah through their dreams? One day, Ibrahim alayhi salam woke up and he had a dream that he needed to sacrifice Ismail alayhi salam for Allah. Now, this was a very difficult thing to do, but Ibrahim didn't think twice about it. He went to Ismail and he said, "Listen, my son, I've had a dream that I need to sacrifice you for God." And Ismail alayhi salam said straight away, "Okay, I accept. If it's for God, that's absolutely fine." Now, Ibrahim and Ismail alayhi salam were both ready for this sacrifice, to do it for God, because they thought that that's what Allah wanted from them. But suddenly, Allah didn't let it happen, and he said, "I don't want this to happen. Here is a ram that you can sacrifice instead. I just wanted to test you to see if you and see if you would sacrifice your whole life for my sake, and you were willing to do that. So here's a ram, sacrifice this," and that's what they did. Now, if you think about Eid al-Adha, the big Eid, you might notice that there are quite a few things in that story that are to do with that Eid. So, for example, when people go on Hajj, they go around the Kaaba that Ibrahim built. They also go up the hill of As-Safa and back up the hill of Al-Marwa, and that's just what Hajar did. They also sacrifice a goat or a sheep at the end of Hajj, and that's just what Ibrahim alayhi salam did. There are so many elements of this story that are all included in what we do for Eid al-Adha and Hajj. So it's a very important story to learn and remember. One important thing we should remember is that when we do something to make Allah happy, then Allah will always look after us. And that's something that's really, really important. So, inshallah, you found this story really, really helpful. Maybe you can go and have a chat with your mum and dad about what happened in this story, and they can tell you a little bit more. I'll see you next time with another story. Assalamu alaikum.